I'd love to introduce to you today Reverend Dianne Willman, who is a Roman Catholic woman priest. Dianne is an advocate and the Deputy Director of one of the departments at the National Prosecuting Authority. Dianne fights for justice, and fights crime every day, and she'll tell you more about that while she's talking. Then we've got Dr. Nontando Hadebe. Nontando is with the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Nontando is a beautiful person and an academic as well, and she's also at St. Augustine College. So Dianne is going to be talking about her chapter for her master's degree in theology that she's doing at St. Augustine College. And that chapter is on prophets, agents of change. I've read the chapter, but I will leave it for Dianne and Nontando to talk, and then I've got a few questions for Dianne, and then we're going to open it up. We might have some vigorous conversation here today, and we might be challenged as well. So over to you, Dianne. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Bonnie, and I appreciate the introduction. I have one complaint, that you called Nontando a beautiful person, and you didn't mention anything like that at all in respect of myself, but that's fine. But thank you very much for the invitation, and I think this is a crucial conversation to have. I think so many places and spaces in our world today, and even right here at home, really need to be changed, needs reform, and we are the agents of that change, so to speak. And change agents for me is very much a prophet. And so I'm going to talk about our understanding of being a prophet, but also, as we use it in our language today, a change agent. But maybe I should just back up a bit and say a little bit about myself and how I got to this point. So Bonnie, yes, this is part of my master's degree, and I'm obviously only just speaking about one particular chapter. And this chapter it's in the context of Catholic women's ordination. So that's the context of the paper, but I'm not going to limit it just to this issue, this one issue, because that's not the only area where change, reform, transformation is needed. It's much broader than that, and this is also what we're going to be exploring today. So in terms of my own personal journey, I think there were a number of things that have influenced me in terms of the decisions and choices that I've made for my life journey. And a lot of them have been influenced by experiences of injustice, discrimination, pain, suffering. I obviously grew up in a time of apartheid, and the experiences of friendships torn apart by that. As a young girl, not being able to meet with my friends who were Indian or African was a deeply influencing factor in my life from an early age. I also have another dimension, and that's my father's side is Polish. So we are war survivors. I come from a long line of refugees in a sense. Most of my family was killed during the war, and spent, the living members today spent most of their time in the labor camps in Siberia, and then eventually got to escape and come through Africa in the different refugee camps. So I have again a sense of this injustice and discrimination purely on the basis of what? Of race, of gender, of sexual orientation, and so on. And these are these systems, these political systems in this case, that just justified violence against people. And so I have almost like a generational experience of this pain and suffering coming through in my own life. And then I've got my own personal experiences where, for example, close friends of mine were gang raped. And this is in the context of our South African society, where there is a terribly high crime rate and has been for a long time. And then I've got the experience within my own Catholic faith tradition, which, whilst on the one hand has been my container and still is my faith of choice in a sense, my faith tradition of choice, it too has wounded. And it wounds in different ways. Once again, the discrimination against women, for example, in being able to fulfill their call to the priesthood. And there are other ways that the church has also excluded groups of people and caused wounding. So all these different influencing factors led me to ask, well, is there anything I can do? Is there anything within my own power, within my own immediate realm that I can do, I don't know, to survive, but more than survive, to perhaps influence, perhaps bring about some kind of change, even if it is simply on the level of an awareness. And so two major choices were made. And the first was that I chose to become a lawyer. So I've obviously studied to become that. And I've spent my entire legal career with the National Prosecuting Authority. I started out as a prosecutor, and I have once again, been exposed to the most horrific crimes. I dealt with murder, rape, and robbery in the High Court, and that too is an exposure to South African society and the brutality of what human beings can do to each other. And again, the question comes out, what is going on in our society? What is causing this, that human beings can treat each other like this? And then as I move through the ranks, I've ended up now where I am in the unit called the Asset Forfeiture Unit. And here we take the proceeds of crime, anything that is the incentive to commit crime or the means to commit crime is what I am largely responsible for in removing. And so once again, it's an invitation to what can I do in my current sphere of influence. But my original calling came from childhood, which is to do with my call to priesthood. Now, being Catholic, of course, well, how is this even possible? How can God call me to being a priest when this is not a possibility in the Catholic faith tradition? And yet the call persisted. And so eventually, in my 40s, I started to take this call a little bit more seriously, in the sense that, not that I hadn't taken it seriously, but I'd heard about this movement that had started within the church, the Roman Catholic woman priest movement, and ordinations had started to take place. And I'd come to a point in my life where I could no longer ignore this call from God, and that the consequences of not doing so outweigh the consequences of doing so. And the consequences, for those of you who don't know, of a woman being ordained is automatic excommunication. So I am an excommunicated person, together with all my fellow priests. And that is one of the consequences that I had to almost make peace with, in a sense, in my decision to answer God's call. And largely the answer for me to priesthood comes from a place of knowing that there has been so much done to try and change the church. There have been movements, there have been conferences, there is theological and theoretical debate. But for some reason, the change is still not happening. And so I constantly asked myself, well, how does then one actually effect change, especially in a giant structural organization like a religion? And this caused me to reflect deeply on the prophets of old. If we think about the Hebrew scriptures, we know prophets are from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew scriptures. And here they were not only speaking truth to power, but they also lived a different way of life. And so it wasn't just a speaking, but they were entering into a particular lifestyle. And that is where they spoke volumes through their life. And here we have, for example, Jesus, who lived the truth, who lived the change he wished to see. And that's a deeply prophetic act. And so for me to move from the theoretical discussion level, the invitation was to live, to practice, not just talk about change in the church in my particular case. And so Richard Rohr talks about soft prophecy, and this is a prophecy that is not just about talking, but it's a way of life that you choose, in a sense, to live the change that you desire. But it is quite a complex concept because it's a combination of contemplation and action. And now this is where Sharon is probably going to hear herself being repeated. But yes, contemplation and action have to go together. Why do I say that? I'm just going to reflect a little bit back onto my legal side. I know that many South Africans are probably extremely frustrated with the NPA. I know there are often criticisms against us and so on. And yes, on some cases, they are justified. To be a lawyer within the NPA and to fight crime in South Africa is no easy task. The experience of being a lawyer with the NPA for 20 odd years, when I reflect on that, I often ask myself, what is it that sustains one to stay within the NPA with very little results often, where you don't see the end result of a great victory, for example, at the end of a long investigation and trial? What is it that sustains you amidst all the difficulties? And you may know already, especially from movies, what can go wrong in a case. You're only as good as your witnesses. And your witnesses either can be bribed, they can also be killed, and so your case flounders. And there are many other challenges that we in South Africa face. There's often legal gaps, and we need to develop the law, and so on. And it's quite a complex process to get a case together. And it can take 5, 10, 15 years. So the question for me was, how do you try and effect change without burning out, without becoming resentful, without becoming overwhelmingly frustrated? So this goes back for me to the question of this notion of contemplation and action. So I've largely emphasized now the action part of it, but at the root is this notion of contemplation. Another term we could talk about is spiritual activism. So yes, be a social justice activist, but rooted in a spiritual way. So what does contemplation do? Well, I think Sharon shared quite a bit with us, but in brief, it grounds you in your sense of being loved. And when you're fighting crime endlessly with very little support, you've got to have resources that support you, that you know that you are loved, for example, and you know where your origin of all graces are. And when you're a Catholic woman priest who's been excommunicated, you need to be able to take the criticism that comes your way, the judgments, the exclusion, obviously the excommunication. And so being rooted in God not only is nourishing, but it actually gives you the foundation to withstand this kind of constant pressure and challenge. So I don't know how much more you'd like me to share around this. I think some of it will come out through questions and the discussions Nontando and I will have. But if I may just end with one key point. The notion of soft prophecy is not to be confrontational, conflictual in a deliberate way. It's about critiquing a system by practicing the better. Elizabeth Johnson talks about prophets not being about predicting the rain, but about building the ark. So what a prophet is doing is not just simply verbally describing a situation. We all know that there are problematic, unjust, unfair, discriminatory practices out there. But what are we doing about it? And I'd like to think, and some members of my community, my religious faith community are with us today, I'd like to think that we are building the ark. And that is what prophecy is about. It's living the change you wish to see. And so in practicing the better, we indirectly critique the bad, but we offer a particular model that you can see, that you can touch, that you can participate in. I want to just mention 3 final points that are linked to that. How does living the change you wish to see actually change things? So the first thing is, I think it raises awareness, consciousness. And the fact that I am, for example, a priest, I have the incredible gift of a community around me, and each one of us, actually by committing in a sense to this new thing, this new change, this new model, is raising awareness on so many levels and different places. So those who come will go back into their family spaces, for example, and raise awareness, even if it's at the level of, oh wow, a woman can be a priest. And so with that growth of awareness and consciousness, Jesus talks about that this is a leaven, and slowly everything will rise. Slowly, as this consciousness goes out, this greater awareness starts. We start asking ourselves the questions, we start wondering, and we start imagining a different future. And then the importance of prophets or change agents is that we need examples. We need those who model. We need those who will embody. What is the change? What does the change look like? Even if that new change is to be critiqued and is not perfect, that's okay. It's getting the conversation going. So we need these exemplary figures, so to speak. And then we also need another dimension for change to happen is we need to know where we're going. So we need those who are representing the change, who, as Richard Rohr says, attracts us forward. So it matters how we live our lives. It matters the quality of our choices. It matters how much we love, because that influences those around us, whether we know it or not. And so for me, yes, on one level, being prophetic can be an immense decision like those that I've made, for example. But I truly believe that change happens at a relationship level and that it is one conversation at a time. And it could even be this very moment right now as we gathered, that perhaps there'll be a new awareness for each one of us. And then we go back into our lives. And slowly we have this new transformation happening. So those are just a few opening comments from my side. Over to you,
Dianne. Well, okay, so you put me on the spot, but I am one of, I go to Dianne's church, and I'm with her community, and I must say, Dianne, it's difficult to express the depth of wisdom, intelligence, knowledge that Dianne has, and that she brings to her community. But the one thing I do notice every single time, I get such a sense that Dianne has put herself in a position where she's completely led by God. Every time she preaches a sermon, it's as if the Holy Spirit is speaking through her, because it hasn't been an intellectual exercise for her. Although she is intellectual and very clever and very I can't think of the word now, but speaks so eloquently. But her speaking is led. There's no doubt about that. People who go there will also agree with me. But I don't want to say too much, because I want to hand over now to Nontando. Thank you, Nontando.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Thank you so much, Dianne. I think you were talking about that we need examples, we need embodiment, we need to visualize, and I think we are very privileged to have you, because on all of those, you tick all those boxes in terms of somebody who embodies a journey that has seen a lot of sacrifice and, you know, a life that is committed to transformation. So I just want to begin by acknowledging your presence, acknowledging how you live out what you are encouraging us to do as, you know, living a prophetic lifestyle that is rooted in contemplation. That union with God is not just, it just doesn't lead to a static life. It leads to follow the things that God is interested in. And we know that God is opposed to all forms of oppression, opposed to any form of dehumanization. And so the whole rooting in contemplation is a dangerous activity. So let me warn you, the minute you decide you are going to be close to God, it means you're going to have to adopt the issues that are important to God. And the minute you pray, you're simply raising your hand, say, save me. And I think really it's something, you know, that we begin with. And I just, you know, when I was listening to Dianne, I always remember that we were studying at UKZN and during the same time, but we never bumped into each other. And now when we are in different spaces, following this kind of similar vision, that's where it's necessary for us to bump into each other. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm going to pick up a few things that you said, and maybe just give my own background, because I'm going to be, you know, in the circle of concerned African women theologians. You can see that all women's issues are on our agenda. It's actually the only agenda that we have, to be able to challenge, confront in a prophetic way all the things that harm and diminish the quality of life of women and stops them from being who they are called to be. Just for myself, I think my awareness of gender inequality and the suffering of women, and we have parallel situations, because I worked at the High Court of Zimbabwe in Bulawayo. It wasn't even my intention. I was just playing around. I did shorthand, and I was playing around with it. I just thought it's a nice, you know, squiggling around. I had no concept that that was the key to my life. And then I was employed as a stenographer for the judges, and I was in both civil and criminal courts as a stenographer, a clerk, and every day I would be opening, you know, files for divorce, preparing divorce files for the judges, and making sure that every Friday those divorce files in the civil court and everything. And I just remember when I first read, you know, started reading all these affidavits, started reading all these, because I had to categorize the divorces, cruelty, adultery, desertion, all that thing, and then I'll put the files there, make sure the judge has all of that. And I just reading that just blew my mind, and I just couldn't grasp in my mind the levels of cruelty that women had to endure. You know, coming just from a stable family of loving parents, I think it was necessary for me to be thrown into that situation and witness that, you know, every day, reading, opening files. And then after I thought, I've had enough of this. Let me move now to another department, which was deceased estates. So I went there and kind of became like a tax officer, worked my way up. And that was even worse, because now the inheritance laws were disadvantaging women. African customs were saying that only the son could inherit. And of course, it was due to women's protests that the law changed. But it was like in the working environment that just my 18-year-old, I started working at the age of 18, and I wasn't even prepared for this kind of world. But I feel like, as Dianne was saying, that somehow you are prepared for your future through what you encounter. And then I'll just, you know, just cut the journey short. And to say that then I came, studied theology. All my theological education was in South Africa. So University of KwaZulu-Natal, feminist theology, liberation theology, very progressive theology. That kind of helped me to deal with my earlier experiences. Just fast forward again, I joined the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. HIV and AIDS, the intersection of gender-based violence as part of the narrative and studying, and suddenly we really, in my own mind, coming to understand that this is a kind of social sin, and yet the church continues not to want to deal with gender issues. And so just kind of locate my context there, and I continued even now to work with those issues. But I want to pick up a point, Diana, that you spoke about in terms of that we need to change our consciousness. And I think you said in your chapter that it's only those that have been transformed that can transform. So that transformation is that what we do matters. And that's what we find is that we have been like a circle of concerned African women theologians really operating at an intellectual, analytical level, and that we have not been able to translate that theology for women so that they will be able to introspect. Because if we are thinking of consciousness, the false consciousness that comes with injustice is that it normalizes injustice, so that when we are sitting and we hear that there's a big meeting in the church and on the podium are 20 men and no women, because we've internalized the injustice, it looks normal. None of us are screaming. We're thinking, wow, this is normal. Okay, the cardinals are all men. Oh, this is normal. That's the false consciousness that has become part of our lives because of the beliefs and the practices in our church that make it okay for gender inequality to be baptized and seen as God's will. The rest of the world has shifted their consciousness. That's why the Constitution in South Africa equalizes everyone. The African Union Maputo Protocol is committed to anything that violates the life of women. So the rest of the world is operating on a different consciousness, where they've seen that gender inequality is, it's a violation of women's rights. So you find that there is a commitment to say that the parliament needs to be 50-50. We need to be seeing more women's faces. That's what happens when there's a shift in consciousness and people can see that what has been deemed as correct is actually wrong. Because that's what happens with the false consciousness, that you actually normalize and you call the wrong rights. And that's really what has been happening. And so for us, that we are moving into the stage, and I want to connect it with what Dianne is saying, when we are making women conscious of how they've internalized patriarchy, to such an extent that when there's a meeting, they expect the chairperson to be a man. They expect the bishop to be a man. They expect, so dealing with this internalized, and even when there's speeches that are being made, when a woman is talking, less attention is given. But when a male says this is true, so to begin to look at, to internalize, because until there's that understanding that we are also part of patriarchy, we've developed this false consciousness that we are unequal, and it operates on all intersections of inequality, whether it has to do with sexual orientation, whether it has to do with being able or disability, every instance of inequality that has been normalized and accepted, really we are the last, I think, bastion of patriarchy, the church. We are so out of tune with what's happening in the world. So that's why a lot of women struggle. You go to the workplace, your dignity is affirmed, your equality is affirmed, you are taking 2 courses, you become a leader. You come to the church, we need to have passports because for people coming to church, because it's a different country, it's a different reality, that they now enter into this reality where all of a sudden the CEO, and it was so interesting because the UN Director for Women, Phumzile, is Catholic, and so she was sharing at one of the webinars that here she is the UN Women Director for the world. And when she goes to church, she sits at the back. She has no input. She's treated, she doesn't have the sense. So there's a disconnect between what's happening in the world and what's happening in the church in terms of marginalization. And so we are finding that the most important thing is no longer to feed, yes, we feed women progressive theologies, but to begin the inner work, to say people have got to change. That's what Steve Biko did. He knew through Black consciousness. He knew that he had to change the consciousness of Black people, and started, talking about Black is beautiful, being Black is, really raising the pride level so that people can realize that what they're being told is false. It's not correct, that you are inferior. And that is when, that's how Steve Biko contributed to the raising of the consciousness of Black Africans. So it's the same that we are trying to do, is to raise this consciousness. And I just wanted to read it's kind of humorous, just to, to go with what you're saying. It's like a test for women to see how much they've internalized patriarchy. The first one is, I defer to men in work situations. I back down in any argument with a man. I get quiet in mixed groups, allowing men to dominate the discussion. I diminish my life and quiet my intelligence so that male co-workers, lovers, and even professors won't be threatened by me. A relationship with a man is really highly desired.
Nontando, sorry. Maybe sit a little bit back from your microphone. Are you breaking up a little bit?
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I was just saying that there is a test, and I'm not sure how far I've gone.
Carry on from where you stopped. Sorry.
Okay, all right. It says a relationship with a man is the most highly desired. His needs are more important than my children, my friends, and my own. I set aside my own life in order to pursue men, and then consider it my duty to meet all of their needs, sexual, emotional, and physical. And then men's interests are more important than mine, and their conversation, careers, and decisions carry more weight than mine. I enlarge my life to learn and grow as a result of their interests. I've learned to like football, to go, to watch sports, and to cook their favorite meals. He says they are superior, I'm inferior. I've never had a healthy and mutual relationship. And really just that whole understanding that women have so internalized that there needs to be a change of conscience, of dignity, of equality, so that, and I mean, feminists have been accused of being men haters, and it's not true. We are lovers of all people. We are simply saying that there's a structural system that has diminished the life of women. And therefore, that's why I'm connecting with what Dianne spoke about in terms of consciousness raising, so that we are aware as women that we are brought into a world that is unjust. We are calling injustice normal, God's will. And that what we do in our private life matters. When we when women in the privacy of their home tell their daughters that they are equal, tell their sons to respect women, that is where change starts. And we've got to keep digging so that the change becomes personal first and relates. And of course, it relates to who God is, and to remind women, that they were created equal, given the same mandate. And so inequality is literally man-made and not God-made. So yeah, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Nontando. Thank you very much. Okay, so
Bonnie, can I respond to a couple of things?
Yes, sure. Please
Just to
go ahead.
maybe bring them out a little bit more. So I don't know if you heard when Nontando was speaking, she used the phrase, transformed people transform. And that is a Richard Raw, quite a common expression for him. That if we are wanting to go out there, if we are wanting to make a change or do something, we've got to first make sure we've done our own inner homework as well. And contemplation is one way that we can do that. In a way, it also helps us to clear the lens so that one is able to see and not have your own perceptions, your own triggers there, and so it colors or it blinds you. So you've got to do your own inner work to be able to see clearly so that you can act truly with love. Another part of this journey of transformation also means to trust your own inner authority. Now, in my case, with a church, for example, many Catholics give over their authority to the hierarchy, to the priests. And a part of that journey is to reclaim your own sense of authority, especially as a lay person, for example, and I hate using that terminology. And that is why, for me, it's so powerful that I have so many in the community, because this, for me, is all of us together owning our authority, even though it might clash with somebody else's view or an entrenched system's power or viewpoint or paradigm. It's also an invitation to trust your encounter with God. This is your encounter with God. Trust it. And so it's very much, the spiritual activism is very much around, it's an act of faith, and it's also trusting it. And I'm wondering how many of us actually trust our encounter with God, and stepping out there, even if the entire faith tradition doesn't agree with you. Do you trust yourself? Do you know that you're actually doing the right thing? And that does take a lot of commitment and investment in your spiritual journey and paying attention to this call from God. Another thing, just to pick up on what Nontando was talking about, this raising of consciousness, what it does, an embodied change, is it suddenly makes us start thinking about what may or may not be possible. It engages our imaginations. So for Catholics, and there are some among us today, for us to see a woman as a priest is part of opening this imagination of ours, and therefore possibility, so that eventually, hopefully, it will become the norm. So just these small acts, which are big in themselves, are actually part of this leaven of change. So thank you, Nontando, for bringing out a few of those aspects.
Thank you, Diana, for really fleshing them out. Much appreciated.
Yeah. She's not an advocate for nothing, hey, Nontando.
Absolutely.
So just before we open up to everybody, okay, I see Marissa's got her hand up. I'll close with my few comments. So Marissa, do you want to unmute yourself? EJ, can you unmute Marissa?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. It's I've been listening with such a sort of a sense of serendipity in the because something that's been engaging me just in the last little while has been, what is the relationship between truth and harmony? And when Nontando was reciting that list of what women, how they view themselves, and it's something that I'm aware of for myself, is that perception that as a woman, my prime, almost like function is to create harmony, to not rock the boat, to smooth things over. And what is occurring to me much more clearly now is that it's a pseudo-harmony, because harmony that is not rooted in deep truth, in actual fact, can't begin to be solid. And what I'm hearing here is a kind of an invitation that, you know, the prophetic voice is actually about marrying truth and harmony, that it is about risking it. And I'm just so aware of the fact that this is exactly what is happening at a systemic level, I hope, at the NEC today. Are we actually going to move forward? Are we going to carry on with this, trading and, trying to bargain and just to make life comfortable? Whereas in actual fact, until we face the deep truths, we can't actually move forward in any sort of way that is meaningful.
Yeah. Marissa, I think you've touched on another part of prophetic work, and that word harmony. The process of change goes something like this: order, disorder, reorder. There's got to be that disorder, that unsettlement stage. And those of you who are following Richard Raw, there's pretty much a lot of that at the moment on his daily emails. And we shouldn't be scared or fearful of disorder. It's healthy. The prophets came and were, as Richard Raw says, disruptors of social consensus. So prophets are meant to be disruptive, and that's why half of them were killed. But that's a separate point. But harmony, yeah, I hold that term very lightly, because we mustn't be scared of disorder as well, and not being harmonious. It's not in any way to suggest something of a violent approach. It's all rooted in one's contemplative nature, in a loving nature. It's very much around what Richard Raw again says, an eagerness to love and to remain faithful to gospel values, but to do that in a radical way. And that might mean that there is disorder. And let's just take your example of that you feel as a woman that you're supposed to be all harmonious and peaceful and not to rock the boat, so to speak. Well, that is going to a deep conceptual ideology and all sorts of different things that we've internalized what a woman should be. And to challenge that is uncomfortable even for women, never mind just men, for example, or systems or structures. We ourselves have to shift into thinking, actually, I might be doing the world a disservice by being simply a harmonious person. Disorder should be valued as well. And I think we're in a critical place in our world today where there are so many disordering things happening. We're decolonizing, for example. We're examining, well, what is gender? What is sex? There are 58 different genders. Do we know that? The church doesn't. The church sits with two. And the church says, well, male and female, and this is your role, and that's your role. And you're nice and separate, but you're not equal. We've heard that before. So we've got to be really careful about internalizing roles that are assigned to us because what? Because we're white, because we're black, because we're a woman, because we're a man, whatever it is. And it's for us personally to do the work and become aware of that. And for a time, this might also be personally disordering as well. But that's okay. If we have a prayerful practice, if we have a contemplative practice, and obviously maybe with spiritual direction as well and other disciplines, that is okay as we move into a new stage where there will be a restfulness. I want to quote something from the Gospel of Thomas. Now, we've often heard in the main four Gospels about seek and ye shall find, knock and the door be opened, and so on. We know that phrase. But that's only half the phrase. The Gospel of Thomas finishes the phrase. And it says, seek and you shall find, and then you will become disordered. You will become unsettled. I mean, the four Gospels don't tell us that. Thomas tells us, then you will become unsettled. But then you will gain your sovereignty, your authority, and then you will find rest. So we mustn't be scared of that disorder part of it. And it's right here at the personal level. And may I just add on that point of just how powerful it is that a personal experience influences the world. If we look at Mary in her Magnificat, she opens the Magnificat with, my soul glorifies the Lord. That's her personal experience of God, so intimate, so powerful. And after that one or two lines, she launches into this manifesto that challenges oppressive systems on a political, economic, and social level. Where does that come from? It comes from her personal encounter with God. And so we must remember that our activism, to be long-lasting and sustaining, needs to be rooted in that experience with God. So thank you for those comments, Marissa.
See, Betsy and Dina have raised their hands. Go ahead.
I would just like to bring up one term that I never hear in discussion, and that's that we are all
Betsy, can you just talk up a bit? Thanks.
okay.
Talk up a little.
Is that better? Better? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm saying I think that there's a term that we should become familiar with and we should make use of, and the term is searchers. I think we should all be searchers, which means we don't have the truth, but we'll be searching for the truth all of our lives. And if we do that along with everyone else, that will bring us together. So I'm saying I want to interject the term searchers and have it recognized and used for what it is the term of searching.
Okay. If I heard you correctly, searchers, as in searching.
Yes, searchers.
Another word could be seekers. We're all
Yes.
seekers and pilgrims and searchers on this way. The early Christians were not actually called a church or anything like that. They were called followers of the way, the way. And so I think there's something in that, because it means that we are a people of change. We're a people on the move. And sometimes there's a danger of becoming too settled. And I think in many respects, some concepts and some structures and systems, etc., have become so settled that they've become now something that has throttled us. In many ways, the Catholic Church has become more like a museum than this life-giving, organic, pilgrimaging church it is supposed to be. So thank you for your comment. I see Bernie. I don't know if there's anybody else.
Bernie, do you want to unmute yourself? Oh, there you go,
Yeah.
unmuted.
Yeah. There's something that's always puzzled me, more so in recent years. And it's this, that our Southern African Bishops' Conference endorsed wholeheartedly our Constitution, and yet as a system and an organization, they practice such violent discrimination. And I have wondered, is there any legal way of challenging that? Because it's not being confrontational in my mind. It's using the tools of the Constitution to come to a place where they are officially challenged. And if we can't do it that way, is there any other way that we can challenge them as a group of people, of lay people, of women priests, of people walking down the streets with, you know?
So Bernie, you know, let's just raise this a little bit more. So yes, they endorse the South African Constitution, which, by the way, may I just say, is one of the best in the whole world. We have truly a model constitution. So it's wonderful that they endorse that. Interestingly, the Holy See is not a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, together with Iraq and a few other countries.
I can't believe that.
Which makes it a concern. So yeah, I think our church is, I don't want to say hypocritical, but I think it's contradictory. And yes, it's also made up of human beings, and I think they've also got to journey and grow with the process. So I'm hoping that there will be change, and I think there are a lot of change agents trying to do that. Challenging the church legally, in other words, for example, taking them to court because they act in a discriminatory manner, is a is a complex one. I certainly think at some point we may just get there. It is something I bear in mind as a lawyer. I have wondered why God has called a lawyer. But we'll just park that for now, lest anybody runs to the bishops and the cardinal. But it's yeah, the field of human rights is quite a complex area, and infringements of human rights are justifiable in certain instances. And you've got to bear in mind the line when it's a private and a public sphere as well. So I don't want to get too much into that, but I think we are certainly coming closer and closer to a legal challenge with Catholic religious practices. More and more religions are being taken to task. We've seen that here in South Africa around pastors and religious leaders. There was also that recent judgment around corporal punishment. And what religion is saying about corporal punishment. The High Court shot that down, that is not justifiable, even if it's on a religious basis. And then, of course, you've got the whole gay angle as well. Pastors who are gay, who are thrown out of the church. I think there was a whole issue around the Afrikaans church as well on this point, and they also were successful in court. So I think we're edging towards that we'll need to appeal to, as St. Paul says, appeal to Caesar for assistance. But certainly right now within our own realm, without having to spend money, having to do anything, we can be the change agents, which is exactly, Bernie, for example, what you do by being part of this community with me in it. That is us changing the world in a nice, easier way and getting on with it. But yes, I take your point, and it's certainly not something that should be dismissed.
And Dianne, even adding to what you said about the best constitution, I think it was one of the theologians that there's a time where the world becomes prophetic to the church.
Yes.
It becomes he calls that reverse prophetism.
Excellent.
You know, where the constitution becomes a critique to church's practices of inequality.
Correct.
Yes,
the so-called secular world suddenly starts to monitor the religious world. And, you know, let's look at the abuse crisis. This is the gift, I say that carefully, that actually the church is being scrutinized, and Caesar, the secular world, is actually getting involved and needs to take action in the affairs of what's happening in this particular religious area. Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship that's unfolding. EJ, I'll just chair the meeting now.
Awesome.
I don't want to.
Awesome.
But I wanted.
Anybody? Sorry, EJ.
Sorry, just want to ask you a question. You know, if I look at some of the prophets in the Bible, you know, some of them are quite almost like those people at science that said, you know, the end of the world is near. But if we have to look in our modern context, how would you describe a prophet? What does a prophet, a modern day prophet, look like?
It's you and me having these conversations. It's every time we have a conversation that challenges a stereotype, where we don't accept a racist joke, a sexist joke. It's living our lives in a way that positively influences the world around us and not being bought into the systems and structures, which means we've got to take responsibility for what we think and believe. And Marissa, I go back to your point, your powerful point for me about what have we internalized? You know, have we internalized that because I'm a woman, I must be a certain way? I mustn't be a priest. I mustn't speak out. I mustn't cause any disharmony. That would just be absolutely against what being female. That's rubbish. We're called to be disruptors of the social consensus. Jesus' love was radical. It was revolutionary love. Yes, it got him killed, but that's not because of any kind of atonement and debt he had to pay for us. That's because of people, ordinary people, religious leaders wanting to keep the status quo. And Jesus was a threat.
If I may say something. Just listening to Eugene about what is a prophet, and I've just been thinking about something that I heard this morning about how we can stand in the tragic gap. So I'm just thinking about every time. Let me just go back a step. So it's about staying really close to God and to be, as you said, be rooted in God. That leads us to our calling, to stand in a gap that presents itself in our lives. And I'm wondering if that could be
Beautiful.
an agent of change.
Beautiful. And I think, Anne, another word that you've just reminded me about is that we are all called. Every single one of us is called. No one is more special. It's up to us to respond to that call and to stand in that gap, in that opportunity. Thank you.
And so I think as well, you know, this person I was listening to, Audrey Marie, actually. And she,
good.
She was saying, prepare to get your heart broken, but it shows that you have a heart of flesh and not a heart of stone.
Exactly. And you will, I mean, being a prophet, you will suffer. And that's not because suffering is desirable in itself, but you're coming up against the status quo, and people are comfortable. And I'm going to be extremely now controversial. I see there's some interesting comments coming up on the chat. Complementarity theory. I don't know what Nontando feels, but that is horrific theology. So here we are now, we've got completely two different viewpoints. How are we going to hold that? Is that okay? We should be looking at complementarity theology and theory very carefully and questioning it. And am I buying into it? A man does this, a woman does that. It's not okay. We're all called to respond in a way that is authentic to how you've been called by God. And it means that there's going to be a lot of self-introspection and, in a sense, destabilization until you get to the other side. Seek and you shall find. Then you will be uncomfortable or disordered. Then you will become sovereign and rest.
Dianne, I see Margaret also raised a hand at one point.
Yes, Margaret, all the way from the west coast of America. Good morning, Margaret. Well, you're on mute. Wait, you're on mute.
Good morning, everyone. Well, for me,
May I
good
just
morning.
say she's one of our candidates in our movement, so welcome, candidate Margaret.
Oh, thank you, Dianne. I guess what I'm finding in my journey right now, especially as a candidate at 68 years old with Roman Catholic women priests and a retired lawyer, is sometimes I think I have an ability to sort of see things at 20,000 feet. And what I just want to reflect back to all of you is the depth and beauty of this conversation and the amazing ability or the amazing grace, I suppose, that has led to these sorts of discussions that when I was coming up as a lawyer, we just didn't have. You know, when I think about starting out in the law, there were very few women in the law in the United States. I grew up as a girl with one woman in the Senate of the United States. When I worked in the Capitol of the United States, there was one restroom for women. I mean, it's amazing. And I think this discussion is so rich because this integration of not only deep internal conversion to the prophetic stance, but also now seeing how from that place, the influence on secular society and being able to integrate those two. when I was a young woman, very few people were talking about that. Perhaps the person who I looked to the most was the former Secretary of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld.
Yeah.
Who was really the only person who was writing about, you know, the call of God and Christian principles, or just the call of God in the civic realm. And I just think we're in an amazing, amazing time. And I so encourage you all to keep doing exactly what you're doing and having these amazing conversations. And I just feel so blessed that by a whole sort of miraculous way, Dianne and I connected, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. But there's something amazing happening. And in the nuts and bolts of the grind of the day, or the quiet prayer of, I don't know what's going on today, God, what do you think? There's something amazing happening.
Yeah.
And I just am so
and
grateful.
part of the prophet is to hold the now and not yet. So doing what is necessary now, knowing that maybe you will not see the fruits of that, and there is someone who has said that before. It might have been Teilhard Chardin, and I'm not too sure of that. Nontando can correct me there. So you might not even see the fruits of your labors now, and that's okay. And that's where the contemplative side becomes important, because you're able then to hold this liminal, this limbo space, even though you're unsatisfied in the sense of seeing the results. And that's where I must say I'm extremely grateful for my legal career, because getting justice is no quick process. We have a case of 20 years old at the moment that we're still going on about. There are no quick fixes, there are no quick results, and we've also got to analyze what is the result. Now, Mother Teresa talked about that it's not about success, it's about faithfulness. So even though I might not win a case at the end of the day, have I been faithful to God in that process? How have I, for example, engaged with the police officials, or with the witnesses, or even with the criminal, him or herself? It's about the quality of our relationships, and maybe that is where the conversion will happen. Even at the end of the day, I don't even get a conviction. So yeah, contemplation certainly helps to hold these very difficult, not immediate answers and transformations. So thank you, Margaret, for reminding me of that.
I see Marissa has raised her hand.
Okay. Marissa, Kerrigan asked a question on the chat. Before we go to you, can we ask Dianne to have a look at that question? I've lost it now somehow. I don't know why.
Yeah, it says, Dianne and Nontando, it would be helpful to unpack complementarity and why it may have damaging consequences, and the theological basis for this, if there's any.
I'm going to turn first to the theologian, Dr. Hadebe, and then I will add to it if necessary.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those that I think it's a sort of a Catholic belief. I think it's in the Catechism that God created male and female equal. That being, the beingness, and they're equal and different, okay? And then they're saying that the beingness of female is different from the beingness of male. And that the biological aspect, the fact that the woman is the one who gets pregnant, therefore, you know, so they say that the role of a woman is being a mother or a virgin. That's in Pope John Paul's letter. And then a male, that's called the Marian principle. And then they've got the Petrine principle, which you know, attributes like leadership characteristics to the male. And so they believe that those characteristics are so different that they are not interchangeable. In other words, what a man can do, only a man can do. What a woman can do, only a woman can do. And the difference, the problem is that that difference does not translate to equality. And so what is even interesting is that if we look at the two letters that Pope John Paul wrote to women, in the first one, he was very, very much women were called to be virgins as well as mothers. But then the one that he wrote just before Beijing, when he realized that women are occupying political positions, they're occupying all kinds of positions, he changes. He doesn't narrow women into a particular gender. But then you see all these things are so interconnected, because then the maleness of Jesus, that's how, because if you believe that that it's like intrinsic to, it's ontological, it's intrinsic to you, then you take the maleness of Jesus and say that because Jesus was a male and men can only do certain things, so, and those things that men can do, women cannot do. That is the reality. And yet when we look in Genesis chapter 1, God did create male and female equal, but gave them the same responsibilities. He says, I'm creating male and female to be like us. So that already disrupts the masculine imaging of God. I need to be able to look at God and see a woman, because if I'm created in the image of God, it means that there is a female presence in God. And so that difference is a reality, but and when God goes on, it says to them, they, both of them, male and female, govern, be stewards of the earth. So we don't have a separate list there in either Genesis 1 or Genesis 2 to say, okay, women, because you are able to produce, this is what you do. Men, because you're able to do that, this is what you do. It is equality. It is complete equality, given the same tasks. So we are talking about Genesis chapter 1. You see the problem with Genesis is that they will pick up the first, the church will pick up the first part in Genesis chapter 1:26, where it says, let us create let us create human beings in our image. And then God created male and female. Then you stop there. But when you go on, it says, let them, both of them, govern, rule, be stewards of the earth. Right there is no differentiation of roles. Yeah. So both are created to be leaders, both are created to be governors, and it just depends on your own capacity. People are different. We each have our own DNA. We cannot just say all the women are like this because they have a womb, because they give birth, and all men are like this. So the essentializing of people is really what is very, it really doesn't promote the ethos that was there. Yeah, so please add, Dianne, and then I can.
Thank you.
This requires a seminar, but yeah.
Nontando, thank you. I mean, that I think was very comprehensive. And I just maybe just, if I may contribute a few thoughts. I mean, Jesus in a sense was very female as well. He exhibited a lot of what we would describe as female characteristics: relational, emotional. You know, the things we say are only attributable to women. So we must hold Jesus also as a radical challenge to our understanding of male and female, because he certainly embodied a lot of female characteristics. And in fact, if you really want to get radical, and we're having a radical conversation today, and Bonnie did warn you in your email, there is a striking, don't know how it will work for you, image of the crucifix, of the crucified Jesus, who actually has breasts. Now just hold that. I mean, if we're talking radical stuff here, we're entering into mystery as well, mysticism, holding the femaleness of Jesus as well. And some writers say that the reason why Jesus chose 12 male disciples, some would say is, well, actually to reform them in terms of their understanding of masculinity. So there's a lot of debate and discussion we can have around this. And I think right now in our world today, this is probably one of the hottest topics which we're needing to confront our understanding of male, female roles, gender, and so on. Marissa, it seems like you've started this whole conversation, so thank you. And Kerrigan, thanks for the question.
Maggie, did you raise your hand, Maggie? And Marissa? Yes. Okay, Maggie.
Sorry, can I just answer to the, where it says there were instructions in the New Testament, Ephesians, to say this is what women do and this is what men do. Yeah, this was part of the household code. And also they were saying this is what slaves do, this is what masters do. So you're looking at a whole structure of society at that particular time. This is what children do, this is what males do. So it's called the household code. And we know from there that the whole slave part no longer works, because we have had a new consciousness that you don't have those kind of social systems. And so, so I really take your point to say that both women and men are given instructions to be able to relate to one another. But even before then, it's like submit to one another. But in whatever criteria that is being given there, I think the leadership of Christ is the model. And we read in Philippians chapter 2 that he humbled himself and became human. So it's a whole servant leadership that is being promoted for both male and female, and it's discussing it. And remember all those letters that we have were for different churches that had different challenges. So if I was in the church in Rome, I would have never known what was written in Ephesians, because I had no exposure to that. And so we always need to look at things. Yeah, so what I'm saying, that is a good point that you've raised, that those things are written in the Bible, but we need to challenge them just as we challenge slavery, because it's all part of the same household code
and
that
it's a letter
in every context to see whether it is harming anybody. But I think it's a good point that you're raising, and we just need to keep going deeper, keep having conversations amongst each other, so that we learn from each other. I have as much to learn from you as well. So let's engage, but to look at that as a package, and to say that one part of that package has been dismissed. We no longer attribute to slavery, but it was all part of the packaging. So now that we are aware of sexism, we've got to rethink those things as well. It's just how it is, So, but thank you, and thank you for the way in which you've raised it. We learn from each other. Thank you.
I think Maggie was going to go next, and then I see Louise as well.
And Marissa, we've left you way behind, Marissa. But Maggie, carry on, Maggie.
For Dianne, for us who are not in the Catholic Church, I just wondered how, working outside of the structure of the church, how you have conceptualized your ministry for yourself and what it entails. And also if you can take us briefly through the process of ordination and what it's like for a person who's working outside of the structure. And I just want to thank you for two concepts that you introduced to us today. That standing in the gap is such a beautiful concept that I think one will think and reflect on it a lot and contemplate on it a lot. And the other one is that disequilibrium, that, what did you call it, disorder, before you find your sovereignty. I like that so much, and I thank you for those two.
Thanks, Maggie, and thank you for reiterating that text as well. So a lot in that. I'm going to try and remember everything that you've said. So first of all, let me just go to an expression that you used. How do I try and change something from the outside? I think if I understood what you're saying. So it's debatable what we mean when we say we are on the outside. The Catholic tradition, excommunication doesn't mean that I'm not Catholic anymore. It just simply means that I can't access some of the sacraments. Well, all the sacraments actually. So if I go to, for example, if I go to Mass in one of our traditional parishes, I won't be able to receive Holy Communion. I'm sort of welcome. I can come there, and I'm still Catholic. My baptism can't be taken back or undone. So I am still Catholic. And I've chosen to remain Catholic and not, for example, to fulfill my desire for priesthood, let's say arguably in the Anglican Church, because my call is specific to my Catholic faith tradition. What I've done, and this is going back to some of the principles of Richard Rohr, which is very much also in line with his idea of prophecy, is that one moves to the edge of the inside. So you're not leaving the faith tradition, but you're moving to the edge to challenge it, where you are no longer constrained or threatened or controlled by it. Now, those who are employed by the Catholic Church, for example, are extremely controlled. They cannot say anything overtly against the church. They will run the risk of, for example, losing their jobs. And that has happened because of my ordination. Someone who participated in that, someone who directed me, has lost her employment. So it's those are the ways that the church controls. So luckily, thankfully, I'm not employed by the church. They can't control me that way. So I have moved within the religion. I have freed myself of, for example, being called, well, then you're going to be excommunicated. Well, then excommunicate me. I am still Catholic. I am still a baptized member of your family. You can close the door on me, but I'm still here. And actually, it's a reflection on you that you turning your back on a member of your own family. Another, I don't know if this is answering your question. Another concept that Richard Rohr talks about is about including and transcending. So you're not stepping outside the religion saying, oh, you're all bad. I'm stepping away from it. You're saying it is good and religion has a purpose. He calls it, it's your holding vessel. It's a container. But at some point you do grow, you evolve, you come into your own, your sovereignty. I love that word, Maggie. Thank you for saying that again. You take ownership and you then move beyond it, beyond the institutional control, the institutional structure. So you're not saying it's bad completely. It has a function, but you've grown in your inner freedom and in your prayer life and your need to love differently. You don't want to be controlled in who you can and cannot love and how you love. All are loved. All are welcome. I can no longer sit in good conscience and go to Mass and sitting next to me is someone who cannot go up for communion. Because why? Because they're divorced? What nonsense. I'm not going to, so I'm including, but I'm transcending. And that's one of the principles that Richard Rohr promotes and is one of the ways that we can transform. We're not throwing the baby and the bathwater out. We're saying there is good. How do we actually remain faithful to the really good?
Thank you.
I don't know if that's okay. Thanks, Maggie. That was a big question. Thank you. I saw Louise's hand, but I'm not too sure who was first.
And then let's just quickly go back to Marisa because we left her way behind. Sorry, Marisa. And then, then the next person.
I basically just, it was responding to, I already have forgotten the name of the lady from America, where she was just talking about living in amazing times. And it was just a sense of, yes, I just see so much opportunity in the fact of where we're living now. And it struck me that, you know, it also affects what almost I would say a spirit of gradualism that I found myself so ingrained in the sense of that if I want to change, I must do it one slow step at a time. And consequently, I'm constantly being pulled back. And now when I speak to my grandchildren, who they don't have any of the kind of indoctrination like that I have, or if they hear anything, they throw it out so happily. They say, but that makes sense. And I'm just so aware of the fact that there is a kind of a freedom that media is such a powerful system. You know, I'm kind of checking with my grandchildren now. What are they watching? You know, just to see how their thinking is going. And I'm finding that that is beginning to challenge me, whereas before it used to be, oh, I wonder if that's dangerous or if it'll lead them astray, whatever else. Now I'm thinking, oh, maybe they're coming from a fresh place, and can I rather engage with them in the sense of saying, and where are you internally with this? You know, it's all, in other words, also I'm very aware of my past is so rooted in the outside permission, and the growth journey is about coming to the inside. And how do I now engage with others at the inside level? Because there is a deep knowing within us. If only we can listen, and you know, and part of that is, of course, the evolutionary systemic principles, etc., etc. You know, so I just wanted to just throw that in.
Thank you, Marissa. Another powerful comment. Thanks.
Who was it? The other person that I interrupted before Marissa? Somebody else.
I know there was Louise who's waiting patiently.
Okay.
I'm not seeing all the hands, so.
There we go, Louise.
Sorry, I was waving at somebody who walked into my kitchen. But while I have, I just want to throw in a question that is really on my mind. We've spoken a lot about the sort of contemplative, embracing way of bringing about change. And I was listening to Christina Cleveland talking, who is an American womanist theologian. And somebody asked her a question about being in a space of reforming. And her answer was, I'm not a reformer, I'm a revolutionary. I burn things. And something inside of me was like, that's so interesting that our discussion today feels like a discussion around reform. And I'm curious about the role of the revolutionary, that it's just going in my head around, that's a sense of contemplative, loving reform, embracing that sort of inner work, as opposed to people, I mean, came across like with Christina, came across like, this is my personality, you know, like I'm a revolutionary, I go in and I burn, and I don't have the patience for reform. I'm just really curious about people's, I'd love to know your opinions around the role of that kind of, the role of revolution.
Well, I think I'd love to hear Nontando's thoughts as well, but just off the top of my head, I think all forms of social activism that do not involve violence, I think are valid forms of change. I'm not too sure what she's meaning in terms of revolutionary, because Jesus has been described as revolutionary. So I think we'll need to just analyze some terminology and see if we understand the meaning. But I think it would come back to, for me, would be whatever she is doing, is it sustainable? Will she burn out at one stage, for example? I mean, I really don't know her, and this is not a critique on her, but those would be some of the questions that come to mind. I also have a problem with the word reformer as well, because Raw talks about transformation and not reform. You don't want to just move the furniture around in a room. You actually want to change the whole house, for example. So that could be revolution. That's radical. You're not just moving the furniture around. So I need to understand a little bit more around that, but anything that suggests perhaps a violent approach, problematic, possibly. And I would go to questions around burnout, sustainability, maybe frustration at some point, and then there's a fizzling out and a disappearing. So I would just ask questions around that.
Yeah, I think I would, echo what you're saying, Dianne. But even when you think about Jesus, in terms of how he just, when we read Matthew chapter 5-7, the way in which he turned the whole law-abiding religion into something that is so radical. It's really so radical. I mean, I remember trying for 1 week to live a life where I turned the other cheek, because I said, let me take Jesus seriously. Going through all those things and say, let me take him seriously. And really, it is so counter, just about everything that is in that Christian constitution of how to live differently in this world. Like, I mean, even with the Samaritan woman, you didn't even talk to women, let alone a Samaritan woman. And he was just disrupting. So there's a way in which even the revolutionary can be also part of the soft prophet, when we really shift and say that women are equal, that all people are equal. I was just doing an interview with Maureen Vuma, who is a woman who we would call disabled, but she introduced us to a new concept. She says, I am differently abled. Sure. And then she wrote a book, with her wheelchair is right, the cover of the book is a wheelchair with a crown, because she calls herself the Queen on Wheels. She says, ascending to the heights of life. And she writes about her personal experience and how she shifts the whole understanding of beauty as related to a kind of appearance. And she critiques us, in the same way that Caster Semenya critiqued. She said, you laugh at me because I'm different. I laugh at you because you're all the same. So, they just critique. They just cause this kind of mind shift where suddenly disability that word doesn't work. We are differently abled. And what happens is that she says, we people who are called disability are actually the gift to you, because none of us, are comfortable with our bodies. That's why there's this multi-billion-dollar industry to fix our bodies. So if they, in their broken bodies, can function and thrive, so there's a kind of revolution that comes from people from the margins who disrupt our thinking about all the categories that we have. Semenya disrupts the binary, that there's only male and female. She's intersex. So now we are lost because she's created in the image of God. So we have to sustain that imagery of God to everybody. And when Nancy writes and says God is a God who is disabled, we can't even think about that, because God made me and this is how I am. So we're finding all these different ways of thinking coming from people who have always been on the margins, and they're just doing it as a way of just expressing who they are. So I think there's a sense in which each and every one of us, as you're saying, Diana, that if we trust our own spirituality and our own difference, we are naturally called to disrupt the status quo that has narrowed us and boxed us in whatever box that we find ourselves in. So in a way, when she says she's revolutionary and she lights a fire, like what you're saying, as long as, if it is really coming from that space of owning her difference as a Black woman, who is going to escape from all the categories that they are categorized in, and is going to do something new in the spirit of the spirit, I think there's that space for that.
Oh, wonderful conversation. Dianne, we've been challenged today, like we expected. Good. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything? Just way back, I'm going back a little. I listened to a talk that Nontando sent on WhatsApp on Women's Day, and she spoke about 2 incidents where women stood up for themselves. The first one was in the Old Testament. Women, there were some sisters whose brother had died or something, and because he died, they couldn't own the land. So the women went to Moses and said, we need this law to be changed because it's not fair. So Moses went to God, and God said to Moses, okay, change the law so the women can own their land. And I was wondering, after I listened to Nontando about that, how long did that take? How long were the women discussing it amongst themselves before they went to Moses? After Moses heard from them, how long did he take to go to God, and how long did it take to come back? Because that takes me to that point where Nontando also mentioned the women in 1956 who marched to Union buildings and stood in silence for 30 minutes in front of the Union buildings, 1956. Only in 1990 were laws changed. That took a long time. Steve Biko, the wonderful man, he talks about Black consciousness, but he's actually talking about respect of a person to each other. So he's not going, okay, we're only interested in Blacks. No, that's not what it's about if you really read Steve Biko. So how many years is what Steve Biko started going to catch on? Just thought about, now this goes, sorry, I can't help it, but I'm passionate about books. So I'm thinking about Sharon's book on contemplative living that most of you have. Her book helps us to become agents of change through our contemplative lives. Then today, even before this talk, I was thinking how Larry's book on the narratives of the Gospel of John and Sharon's book tie up quite nicely together, because Larry talks about how Jesus took each person where they were at that time. Like Maurice's not here anymore, but in her place where she feels she needs to change. Me and personal stuff, I won't go there now, but I'm not frightened to share it with you, also need to change. But Jesus gradually changed the people in those stories in the Gospel of John. So it's the law of gradualness. So we sit, like Dianne has been saying, we have to sit with it. We have to go through that gradual process. So Sharon's book practically through contemplative practices that she teaches us, and then Larry's book with the stories from the Gospel of John complement each other with that gradual transformation. And most of you have got both books.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie.
Sorry, I'm not punting the books now. Today's talk wasn't about.
Nothing to sell today.
I've got nothing to sell
Just
today.
a whole lot of disturbing ideas. Louise, Larry Kaufman, Bonnie's brother.
Oh.
Maybe, Bonnie, can you maybe just put your email address? Although, Louise, I think her email address would be on one of my emails. Okay. So if you don't come right, let me know.
But those of you who've got both books, start looking at the way they work together. So I'll get Sharon, Larry, Dianne, Max to come and have and Nontando. We'll have another coffee with God with all of them.
And speaking about that, I was looking for Nontando's book yesterday on Amazon, and I don't see it yet distributed that way. Is there a way of getting these books in the US? I don't see them. Is that still in the works, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's still in the works, but it's going to be going on to Amazon soon. Did you get the title, Mother Earth?
Yes, ma'am.
Mother Africa. Yes, it should be going there as well. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. And if I could have the longer description of Sharon and Larry's book, I appreciate it at some point.
Okay. I will, Bonnie, will you email it to me and I'll forward it?
Yes.
So it's just details of the book, hey, Margaret, the author and the name.
You can look it up, and I can look it up and see if I can get
Yeah,
it.
because I know, Margaret, with you, I think I'll have to, we're looking at ways of doing ebooks. So, yeah.
Can I mean, I know you've got copies, Bonnie. Maybe, I don't know if it's possible to post to America.
You know, I'm getting calls from the States and the UK for Sharon and Larry's book, and it's horrendously expensive to
No,
get them
this is
over.
dollars. This is dollars. They've got dollars. Margaret has dollars, so I'm sure it's not a problem.
Shame, Margaret. Okay,
it's just
I'll let
for
you
us.
know. Okay.
Yeah,
it'll be $1 for them.
I know, true.
The rate of change is a little horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But okay, I will send the details and then I'll chat to Margaret.
Okay. Well, and while we're on the subject of books, I'm going to organize a Coffee with God where we discuss how books assist us in our spiritual journey and faith journey. Yeah. Sharon's book, I think, saved my life a few times.
I just have to say, I'm just so cool. This is great.
South Africa is an exciting place to be, although, Margaret, I think your country is also going through a disordered time.
Oh my goodness, we are. But it's but we are, and it'll be interesting. I believe two things. I believe that the arc of history bends slowly to justice. Not my quote, but one of our great leaders that I can't remember right now, one of our civil rights leaders. And I think the other thing is that, you know, America is never done. It's sort of in our DNA as a country. You know, even in our Constitution, we talk about creating the Constitution and the preamble to form a more perfect union. And we continue to strive to form a more perfect union. But it's slow and it's tough, and exactly what one of the other women said, that, you know, the kids now aren't into incrementalism. You know, I got to know, you know, some of the millennials when I was still teaching, and you know, it's kind of like, if it doesn't work, let's just reinvent it, you know, or, I mean, they're not attached.
Yeah.
And that's good, and I think difficult. I think we'll come out of this. It's a very hard time for us.
Yeah.
And it just makes a lot of us just cry because it's a hard time. So pray for America.
And I think it just reminds us that we are just a human race and we're all trying and we're all faced. So it's actually quite nice to have such a diverse group.
Yeah.
Right. Bonnie, sorry.
Okay. Wow. Today we've gone on now for almost 2 hours. And normally our Coffee with God is an hour long. So it means that this has been a very important discussion and sharing that we've all had. Wow, it's been amazing. I think everybody agrees. Dianne, gosh, thank you. You are just the wisest, most intelligent.
But am I beautiful like Nontando?
She's beautiful. Everybody's beautiful. You really put me on the spot.
I'm just teasing.
So, gosh, thank you everybody for your participation and your rigorous discussion and all that. It was wonderful. Nontando, thank you. Okay,
thank you, my dear
sadly,
Diana.
we're saying goodbye today.
All the participants, because it's a community. We provoke each other and we learn from each other. So thank you. Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you, Bonnie, and everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, so are we saying goodbye now? I feel quite sad. Unmute yourselves and we can say goodbye to each other.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye,
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye, everyone.
See you, Jean.
Bye. Good
Bye.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you. God bless.